In Genesis 1, we're going to start with the creation of of heaven and the earth. That's pretty much what I thought, the creation of heaven and the earth. Genesis 1 and 2, it talk about the face of the deep and the face of the waters are described, or the description of a watery, disordered chaos. God creation involves separating, setting boundaries, and ordering this watery chaos in order to create a space for life to flourish. God creates by simply speaking a verbal command on verse 3. God's creation of a dome in the midst of the waters assume a flat earth and a clear dome that pushes back to the lower waters and the blue upper waters to form the space of the sky. Verse 6. When verse 11 is talk about let the earth put forth vegetation, part of creations are invited to join with God in the process of creating and ruling. That's Genesis 17:24 and 28. Now, in verse 14, the first 3 days of creation form three regions. Day, the region of light and darkness. That's Genesis 1, 3 to 5. Part 2, the region of the sky. Genesis 1, 6 to 8. And day 3, the region of the earth with its vegetation. Genesis 1, verse 9 to 13. And beginning in verse 14, the next 3 days of creation provide the inhabitant for each of these regions. Therefore, the sun, moon, and stars occupy the region of light and darkness. Verse 14 to 19 concentrate on day 5. The birds fill the sky and the fish fill the lower part, the lower waters. 20 to 23, which is day 6, the animals and the human occupy the earth. Verse 21, so God created the great sea monsters and other ancient stories of creation. The sea monsters are portrayed as independent gods of evil and chaos. Here, the sea monsters are made by God and subject to God's control. Let's come down to 26 to 31. And 26 to 31, it said, the plural us and our image is probably a reference to an ancient motif of an assembly of divine being. Here, God and God's divine advisors compared on 1 King 22 and Job 1. They resolve to create humankind in their image and likeness. The divine image characterized the human vocation of dominion or caring for the fish, birds, and animals. Human dominion or rule to be similar to the way God ruled over and care for all creation. verse 27. The human image of God includes both males and female. 31. God's final evaluation for the creation was very good. Concludes a series of refrain throughout Genesis 1 about the goodness of creation. Genesis 1, 4, 12, 18, and 21. This is the comparison for the reading. Now we're going to talk about Genesis 2. God resting on the seventh day of creation became an explanation for one of the Ten Commandments, that the seventh day of the week be set apart as a Sabbath, a day of rest and no work, on Exodus 20:8 through 11. The word Sabbath comes from the Hebrew word Shabbat, Shabbat, meaning to rest. Let's continue on. On Genesis 2, verse 4 to 14, you talk about the second creation story, the Garden of Eden. Verse 4, the opening formula. These are the generation of some or sometime alternately translate as these are the descendant of, or this is the story of, marks the beginning of new sections throughout Genesis 6 verse 9, 10 verse 1, 11:27, Genesis 25:19, 37 verse 2. And the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, a heading for this second and different creation story. The creation story in Genesis 2 uses a different divine name, Lord God, instead of simply God. In Genesis 1, and Genesis 2 begins not with the chaotic waters in the deep of the deep, as in Genesis 1, verse 1 to 2, but with a dry desert, like the watery deep. The dry wilderness is a biblical image of evil and chaos. In Isaiah 21, verse 1 to 3, 43, verse 15 to 21. In verse 7 of Genesis, the Hebrew words for man, Adam, is closely related to the word for ground, Adamah. This Hebrew wordplay underscores the close relationship of human in the soil. Genesis 3, verse 9. The Lord God formed man from the dust like a potter forming clay. This earth creature became a living human only when the Lord God breathed into it the breath of life. Verse 8, the Garden of Eden, which means literally Garden of Delight. Two trees, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, stand in the middle of the garden. They will become important later in the story. Genesis 2 verse 17, 3 verse 1 to 7, and 22 to 24. Eating from the tree of life would give immortality, and eating from the tree of knowledge would provide wisdom, moral discernment, and the experience of pleasure and pain. And verse 10 to 14, the image is that of a lush garden at the center of the known world, from which four major rivers flow. The rivers, the water of which two major rivers flow to water the earth. We know the location of the two of the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. They are in Mesopotamia, Havilah in verse 11, maybe in Arabia, and Cush in verse 13, may be associated with Africa. So let's continue on. Genesis 2, verse 15 to 25 deals with the Garden of Eden. Is not a paradise of luxury, but a place for human work. Human will till the garden and keep it. Verse 16 to 17. The command not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil carries a grave consequence, which in Hebrew reads literally, you shall surely die. The term helper does not imply an inferior assistant, but a genuine partner who comes to the aid of another. God is often called a helper for those in need. In Psalm 10, verse 14, and Psalm 54, verse 4. And verse 19 to 20 of Genesis 2. God's first attempt to satisfy the human loneliness, animals, fails. God invited the human to participate in shaping the characters of the animal by giving them names. Verse 21 to 22. God tries a second strategy to satisfy the human loneliness. God fashioned a woman from the rib of the sleeping man. Unlike the animals, the woman instantly evokes a joyous response from the man. The man's brief poetic response plays on the Hebrew words ish, I-S-H, ish, which is men, or isha, I-S-H-S-H-A-H, woman. They become one flesh, suggests not only sexual union, but also unity through a common household and the raising of children. This was Genesis 1 and 2, the breakdown of Genesis 1 and 2 from the reading that we just made.